Good morning. Happy August, everyone. Welcome to the 7th session of the 2019 Champlain Institute. My name is Lynn Bolger, and I help organize this Ideas Festival here at College of the Atlantic. This week, we are exploring acts of diplomacy and dissent through artistic expression. Maybe the people on the porch want to come on down. Thanks. These expressions of worship or outrage or hope have had the capacity to educate or disrupt. Which brings me to neon pink teeter-totters. Did you hear about this yesterday? Cool, right? So Tom Cahill sent me this clip of children going up and down in the desert on day-glow seesaws that were installed by artists on the border of the U.S.-Mexico border in the desert. Children, Mexican children going up, grinning ear to ear, American children going down, laughing their heads off. The seesaws go through the wall, the vertical slat, not the wall, it's not a wall, steel slats, just steel, slats of steel, but we won't get into that. And it's just this wonderful expression of how art can make fun of serious issues, poke fun, undermined. Martin Espada, a Latino poet who teaches at UMass Amherst, says, "I could not be a political activist without a sense of humor, without a sense of joy." Once you look around, there are so many examples of how art works to promote or challenge the status quo, a brutal regime, ignorance, intolerance. We've explored many here this week. Monday's discussion with Francis and Julian highlighted the rejection by the members of the Bloomsbury group of constricting social mores from the Victorian age, the repression of women, and the intolerance of homosexuality. Tuesday morning, we heard that the U.S. State Department uses our tax dollars in the most wonderful way by sending artists and poets and musicians around the world to promote diplomacy. Catherine Collins used the phrase soft power and hard places, and I love that. I'll use that. We won't forget that. We also heard about documentaries and movies that change people's lives with Bryn and Susan, that change how we think about issues like incarceration and redemption. And Tuesday night with Imbolo and Christina, we wondered if radical empathy, lots of research, and being committed to the authentic gives us permission to tell, write, paint another's story. Wednesday, we heard one person's one-dimensional view began to deepen at the sight of a blue glaze on a ceramic vessel from 7th century Iran. How there are cracks in the wall, and that's how the light gets in. We also had some fun with food. We had food fights. And I think we all agree when next we read a restaurant review, the phrase death by massage will waft up from the page. Julian said yesterday that much of what we've talked about so far is artists using their work to educate or promote causes, but this morning we dive deeply into dissent. Laura Poitras is a filmmaker, journalist, and artist. Citizen 4, the third installment of her post-9/11 trilogy, won an Academy Award for Best Documentary and shared in the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for NSA reporting. Part 1 of the trilogy, My Country, about the U.S. occupation of Iraq, was nominated for an Academy Award. Part 2, The Oath, focused on Guantanamo and the War on Terror, and was nominated for 2 Emmys. She wrote an essay called The Art of Dissent, which was published for the New York Times Op Doc series. With it, she shows a 9-minute film called Panda Panda. So here's how this morning's going to work. I'm going to read the short essay now, then we'll watch the film together, then I'll welcome Nancy Schafer and Desson Thomson to the stage, who will talk about the film as Dissent, and in general as film works, and they'll take your questions after about 40 minutes or so. So here is the essay. It was written in 2015, so some of Ai Weiwei's circumstances have changed, but Ai Weiwei and Jacob Appelbaum are artists, journalists, dissidents, polymaths, and targets. Their respective governments, China and the United States, monitor their every move. They have been detained and interrogated. I cannot leave China, and Appelbaum is advised not to return to the United States. They are separated from their families. I has been imprisoned and beaten by the police, yet each continues his work and speaks out against government wrongdoing. In April, I and Appelbaum met in Beijing to collaborate on an art project commissioned by Rhizome and the New Museum in New York. As a filmmaker and target of state surveillance myself, I am deeply interested in the way being watched and recorded affects how we act and how watching the watchers, or counter-surveillance, can shift power. I was asked to film their project. During the encounter, I and Appelbaum continually filmed and photographed each other. Between their cameras and mine, we created a zone of hyper-surveillance. Almost everything was documented. Just outside Ai's studio hung surveillance cameras instilled by the Chinese government. The art project the pair made, Panda Panda, was not about surveillance, it was about secrets. The stuffed, cuddly toy panda bears with public, shredded NSA documents that were originally given to me and Glenn Greenwald 2 years ago in Hong Kong by the whistleblower Edward Snowden. Inside each panda, I and Appelbaum placed micro SD memory chips containing a digital backup of previously published documents. The project's title, Panda Panda, is the synthesis of two terms created by dissident cultures. The slang term for the secret police in China is panda, which is a censorship-evading Mandarin homonym. National security sounds like national treasure, aka the panda. Panda Panda also refers to peer-to-peer communications, P2P, a method of decentralized networking, and a philosophy of egalitarian human interaction on the internet. Like the red lanterns I hung under every surveillance camera the government had installed outside his studio, Panda Panda playfully acknowledges and rejects state power. So let's watch the film.
Oh, some of these are different. In this case, you see a breakdown of the CIA budgeting, and in this case, about cryptologic programs. This is talking about their programs to monitor the things you do on
Twitter.
corporate services like Twitter.
Social one.
This one's a good one, and it explains that they use this for propaganda, deception, mass messaging, pushing stories, alias development, and for psychological manipulation.
Who's doing that?
This is the British government. They call it full spectrum cyber effects.
So
It's from the head of JTRIG and from SD effects lead.
so it's programmed for whom to use.
It's to use on you and to use on me.
Yeah, but who's going to use it?
These people use it to
Agencies.
disrupt us.
Agencies.
Yeah. So you know when you were attacked on
That's
Twitter?
nice one, because in China they have this. So I thought only Chinese have this, but
No.
let me click that one, that page.
This page?
That's interesting. Because we always think, we call it a 50 cents army.
Yeah.
So
Here's one where the journalists involved either didn't understand the technology or they did and they decided to help censor. So-called network operation detection. The NSA can target financial or commercial organizations that are unnamed. They can just do whatever they want to those organizations. Does that remind you of anything?
there was routine interrogation. If I talk about the room I have been in, there's a bed, there's a toilet, and there's a table for questioning. I was handcuffed with the armchair, and there's always two military soldiers with uniforms 80 centimeters in front of me, 24 hours a day. So in the room, the light is never off. They cannot talk, but they always look at me emotionless. Yeah, basically that's the condition.
Get off the airplane, and at the customs desk they flagged me and took me down an escalator and then past a mirrored kind of observation post. At one point the mirror door opened and someone said, "So that's what a terrorist looks like these days?" Then I was taken into another room and they took off some of my clothes and pushed me up against a wall, and one officer grabbed my wrists and held me against the wall, where another one stuck his fingers dangerously close to being inside of me. And then they put me in an interrogation room. And they took turns asking me lots of questions about WikiLeaks and about Julian. And at this point, they're still holding me while ripping apart my shoes with a screwdriver so they could see if I had hidden anything. So it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. And I kind of felt like I knew that this was coming, because I knew that effective political dissent would ensure a reaction in the form of, political persecution.
Special Panda with all this. Right? Special Panda. You still got, oh God, look.
It's a panda suit.
Can't believe the one panda would take so much stuff in there. Look. That's from one panda. Shit.
It's just not clear to me what the pandas think. You know, like how do the pandas feel that they're being used for information trafficking?
When I started filming with you, this is just not where I meant to ever be.
Right, so we're going to take this out of the Panda, and we're going to stuff those documents in, and then we're going to put a card that has all of the documents on them. And we're going to distribute them to as many different places as we can, so it's like a distributed backup. So if we send one to different places, it makes it impossible to destroy the information without destroying all 20 of them. And one of the safest places to put these things is in a museum or in a gallery where it's as an object, it's protected.
Here to talk about what we've just seen is Nancy Schafer, who has long family ties and history on MDI. In fact, I was telling Nancy in the green room that as I look through registration cards, I'd see people like it would say Bloomsbury Group 0, Tuesday morning 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, Nancy Schafer. We call these cards FON, Friends of Nancy. Nancy is an accomplished producer working in independent film. She was the executive director of the Tribeca Film Festival and executive vice president of Tribeca Enterprises for 11 years. She created and ran the South by Southwest Film Festival for 8 years before that. She is also one of those people, though insanely busy, is also insanely generous. She has spoken at COA a number of times and has generously mentored students here. Nancy also runs Original Thinkers in its second year.
Yes.
An ideas festival a lot like this in Telluride, so she knows what goes on here. And joining her this morning is Desson Thomson, who was the film critic for the Washington Post for 25 years. Des left the Post in 2008 and became a speechwriter for the Obama administration. He currently serves as Director of Executive Communications for the Motion Picture Association of America, the political advocacy organization for the Hollywood film industry. Great people to talk about what we've seen today. Welcome, Nancy, Des.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Well, first of all, I just want to say how amazing is this event I mean, I can hear Maine saying, "You're welcome." And it's terrific to see all these faces so early in the day. You know, I'm usually not used to seeing so many faces before 10 a.m., and it's great. So I just wanted to sort of talk briefly about this film and then have a conversation with Nancy and then open it up for your questions. So, you know, please share all your feelings and thoughts about this. But I'll just tell you a wee bit about myself. As a film critic watching this, I look at it, you know, in a film critic way, but I also look at it as a citizen. But in a film critic way, I think of it as, you know, what are the components here that are even more powerful than what we're actually seeing? And I think that says things about us. And I think one of the things is storytelling, where we're all perpetual, unforgivable storytellers. And what's the enemy here? It's secrets, government secrets in this case. And what is art? Art is about uncovering secrets and how important that is for us. And there's another element here which we all understand in a certain way without realizing it, and that's we all have this sense of play. When children indulge in play, quite seriously, they take it very seriously. What's going on here is sort of satirical recreation. Sort of, here's a panda, which is a childlike toy, and it's just been filled with, you know, government secrets, and, you know, open it and you'll uncover it yourself. So, and the lantern being hung next to the surveillance camera puts a smiley face on it, and it's a sense of play. So it's this sort of drama is so important to us all. Art sort of being that, under that rubric. So what I want to talk about with Nancy is just the, sort of those general things where art has this power, and it has this power because we give it this power. Art isn't just sitting there floating above us. It's a very interactive thing with all of us. So we're all storytellers sitting in the audience. The people on the screen they just get paid to do it, or not paid to do it, and you know, there's that role is sort of increasingly breaking down. We've become more and more storytellers. I was talking with Nancy about how transparent we all are. We give each other stories all day long on Instagram, Facebook, and, you know, Twitter and so forth. I mean,
I was also just thinking when you just said that, we didn't talk about this before, but the power of film and the power of Laura Poitras' film is that she's taking an isolated incident where they're creating these 20 pandas, and film magnifies everything. So when we talk about stories and how they can impact the world, one of the things we think about as filmmakers is the channels with which we can exploit those stories and tell them even bigger and even bigger and even bigger. So Instagram and Facebook and all these, they're massive platforms which everyone can share in, and that amplifies the stories that we think are important and shares them with an even broader community. And film is the reason everyone's so obsessed with film these days is because it can reach such a large number of people. I mean, if you think about sort of storytelling as novel writing, it's a much smaller segment that are going to read a book as opposed to see a 9-minute film. So we can just reach a lot of people with the stories we want to tell.
And all the bells and whistles.
Yeah.
You got music.
And we can have explosions.
Explosions, yeah.
Yeah.
But what makes those explosions have impact, so to speak, is what they mean in the story. So now I don't know if I'll look at a panda the same way ever again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and you think about those little pieces of paper going out into the world, and it's impactful as a thought that, like, how to disseminate information. It just really is. And Weiwei and Jacob, what they're doing there is, you know, some people might not believe in what they're doing. I think what they do is very controversial, actually. But the fact is they're figuring out how to use modern technology and the way we tell stories now to spread their thoughts throughout the world, which is kind of huge.
Another aspect of this is the sense of play I was talking about is about how the government is watching us, but so let's watch them back and see how that feels.
Right.
I mean, essentially. And really, we're just in an age now where everyone's watching everybody else. And it's just this, It's like a hall of mirrors that we all live in now. And one sort of side subject to that is cinema verite, which Nancy, I'll ask Nancy to talk a bit more about, because she's got a couple of projects where that genre comes up, where basically it's documentary filmmaking but done without a script. How would you?
I think the most famous, I don't know, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong, cinema verite film is Grey Gardens, which I hope many of you have seen. It's an Albert Maysles film, and it follows Big Edie and Little Edie in their day-to-day life and sort of showcases how their weird lifestyle. So that's cinema verite. It's when you follow someone true to life. And I just made a cinema verite film that premiered on HBO on May 28th that you all can watch. It's called Running with Beto. And we followed Beto's work from the week before he announced his candidacy for Senate of Texas running against Ted Cruz, all the way through the election. So we followed him for 54 weeks or something like that. And we had sometimes one camera on him and sometimes 20 cameras on him. Or 20 cameras out shooting various aspects of the campaign. So that's cinema verite. And what we did is we created a story. And documentary tries to be as truthful as possible. I mean, we're humans, but we're trying to tell a true story. And so we followed him and we cut together this story about his campaign. And that is a sort of amazing to think that all these people who are public figures or not public figures have cameras on them all the time. And we followed 5 sub-characters as well. We followed a woman who had recently come out but had been raised on Fox News and had been raised a conservative and was like finding out who she was, fighting with her stepfather about who they were and living in Brownsville, Texas. We followed other campaign volunteers, and it's just a fascinating way to tell a story, which is verite, is to follow very closely and for a long time the subject that you're following.
Yeah. There was another point you talked about, which I thought you'd share, where you talked about cinema verite being a hunch, and sort of bringing into perspective the idea. The creators of cinema verite, the filmmakers, they advocate that, to a certain extent, they try to be as neutral as possible, but there is no perspective that doesn't have some aspect of judgment in it. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, so the way this film came about is this guy called me, the director, that called me from Texas, and he said, I play on a Texas adult baseball league, and I'm on the Austin team, and this guy Beto O'Rourke is on the El Paso team, and he's been a 3-term congressman, and I think he's going to run against Ted Cruz, and I want to follow him for a year. And I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in my life. You're like that. No one's going to give you any money. He's a Republican. Ted Cruz is a Republican in a red state. Like this is this is a stupid idea. And then he's like, just watch the footage. So I watched like literally 2 minutes of Beto giving a speech on the floor of Congress, and I called him back and I said, let's do it. So you just know when you find a subject that is going to sort of transcend regular storytelling and become something that is magnetic on screen. You can see it. I mean, I can see it. I think other people can too. Sort of immediately I knew that I didn't know he was going to do as well as he did. I knew he was going to lose. But I did know that there was something there that we would be able to make a film about.
And then you became part of what is I believe, the record fundraising total of any candidate in political history. So that hunch worked out pretty well.
Yes, and I was able to raise the money for the film because Beto was able to raise the money for his campaign. I mean, It was all part of the same thing.
So that brings up another interesting notion, which is when you are trying to tell something to a large number of people, you got to pay for it in some way.
Right.
You've got to go to people and say, I need money in order to do this, and they say, well, what do I get for my money?
Right.
That whole interface. Talk about that a little bit.
So Beto's actually, that film is a really interesting case, and I'm sure none of you all care as much as I do about the business of film, but that's kind of what I do. And one of the things that was interesting is that we raised the first chunk of money through private equity, which means investors who we would have to pay back eventually. And then when we got to a certain point, he was so popular that we were able to raise the rest of the money through not-for-profit. So people just wanted to give us money to get his story out there. So, so that's obviously a great equation for making your money back on a film, but it was just because of the power of him. I mean, you know, that was not in my crystal ball. I didn't know that would happen, but
No.
it did, which was great.
But people who finance a movie sort of feel in some way that they're storytellers too. They're sort of
Right.
support group of them. And so there's this much larger family of the storytelling, you know, universe.
Yeah, and there's a, you know, it's, you know, fiction film is different than documentary film because in documentary film, you know, a lot of documentary is social awareness, socially justice films driven. So you get people who are interested in the topic of the film. In fiction film, it's like celebrity and glamour and power, and there's different kinds of people who are attracted to different kinds of story, and you just sort of have to know, you know, as a producer, how to find those people who are going to support your vision. And they don't believe they have a say in the film, but they definitely believe, and they're right, that they're an integral part of the process. And they want to be there on set, or they want to be at the premiere, and they want to be part of it's a family really that creates a film because we're all together for a long time.
So for something like almost 2 decades, you've been a festival director, which has an element of its own dissent, creativity, impact, films with impact. You've been on the forefront of saying, what are we going to put in this festival that's going to make impact or a difference?
Right. So festival directors in the film world are a little bit of the gatekeepers of what the world is going to see, which is an awesome and wonderful responsibility. I remember I had sort of a crisis of my own faith in sort of the middle of the Tribeca years, which is, am I doing enough to affect change? What can I feel like, I have a nice job, I sit at a desk, am I doing what I can do to make the world a better place? And I came to the conclusion, at least for a few more years, that I had to be okay with showing people the stories of people that they don't know anything about. Like, one of the things we can do to affect change is bring awareness to stories that we're unfamiliar with. So I had to come to terms with myself that those stories that I was sharing with New York City and the world and sort of bringing to a broader audience, that was going to help people become, aware of the plight of others and the issues that we're facing today.
What were your favorite films that you put on where you felt a sense of pride that you had, at least brought forward an issue and gotten people talking?
Well, there's a million.
Right.
But one of the ones that I told you when we were talking on the phone prior to this, which was very impactful, was in the early years of Tribeca, like in 2005 or 2006. We showed this fiction film and we premiered it called Transamerica, and it starred Felicity Huffman before she had tried to get her kids illegally into college. As a transgender woman hitchhiking across the country to see her child. And we had never seen a transgender woman on screen like that. And I just remember the fact that it wasn't even about the transgender woman because the film was so good. So if the film hadn't been any good, we wouldn't have shown it and it wouldn't have mattered, right? But the film's so good, you don't even think about the fact that it's sort of breaking these major boundaries, which is putting a transgender character as the lead of a movie. So things like that, it's the better the story is, the more the subject sort of recedes into the background, and we just learn through sort of osmosis that there's all these different stories out in the world, and we tell them, and if we tell them well, we assimilate that information. I mean, I don't know if you guys know this company called Participant, but they make these movies where they try to tell these great stories that have some sort of social impact in them, but you're not supposed to know they have social impact, because the second we are aware that we're trying to be taught something, we shut down and we don't want to learn it. So you have to learn it sort of through a good story. That's what good storytelling can do, is really open your eyes.
How do you measure that it's done well, for instance, that you've had that impact at a festival? I mean, there's standing ovations, I suppose, but
Well,
what's the
tons
follow-up?
of press,
Yeah.
and like Transamerica got all this press for how gutsy she was to take the role, how gutsy we were to show the film, And kind of when you're a festival programmer, you're like, I'm not gutsy, this is a good film. Like, it doesn't, there's no, if it was a bad film, we wouldn't have shown it. You know, we wouldn't take a stand and sacrifice the art. The art was there, and it just happened to have a message in it.
Yeah.
So we were always just looking for good work, and exploiting that in a certain way to create audience and develop audiences around New York City. And the thing about Tribeca and South by Southwest, both the festivals that I started, they have huge megaphones. So everything we showed rippled around the world, which is amazing. So you just really do have a pretty massive platform from which to try to, as I say, to try to affect change, to try to tell good stories.
Yeah. And little by little, people start to see the envelope open for more and more types of stories featuring more diverse characters.
Yeah.
At the Motion Picture Association, where I work, we are trying to promote an increasing diversity of storytellers. I mean, we were very excited about the film Black Panther, which just broke all kinds of records, superhero records, and an entirely, African American or African cast, which the audience sort of went, why not? Why?
Super impactful,
Why
that film.
why is it always a white male?
Right.
In a flying cape, or anything really, or politics. You had talked to me also about how still hard it can be, though, to get financing for women directors, women filmmakers.
Yeah, so I left my job and thought I'm going to champion women filmmakers. That has not gone super well. I'm actually trying to think of, I have had one female director, just in my own defense, since I left my job. But one of the first projects I came onto was a film that had a ton of sort of indie industry support. Like, the filmmaker was a sort of an it girl, and we were going to make this movie about, she, the filmmaker, had been a dancer who danced with David Byrne on world tour. So when David Byrne performs, there's these dancers behind him on stage, and she was one of those people. And through that process, she had attracted a stalker. So this was right before Me Too, or a couple years before Me Too, and we were going to tell this story because it's a big, important story for women. There are a lot of women have bad experiences being, the focus of too much attention by mostly crazy people. And we were gonna tell that story, and we could not raise, I raised development funds, but we couldn't get past that. We couldn't raise the money. The other handicap, she was a first timer, I get it, but she was everyone knew her, everyone was like, oh, this project is wonderful, the script is great, and we couldn't raise more than $100,000. So we never made that movie. And I think there's been a lot of spotlight in Hollywood and the independent film industry on the plight of women, and how they're, like, I think last year 6% of the movies made or released in America were made by women. 6% is not a very good number. So there's a lot of focus on it, but it hasn't actually changed yet. Mm-hmm. And the gatekeepers in Hollywood tend to be people who all look alike, as in they're white men who wear baseball caps. So you have to try to break that mold of looking at taking a meeting where everyone looks the same, and they think it's okay because they're all the same kind of person. You know what I mean? So we have to try to break that.
Well, have you tried wearing baseball caps?
I don't wear it with the insouciance of some of these younger boys.
And a little more arrogance when you walk in.
Yeah.
I think
The
that
sense of entitlement, yes.
Just throw your jacket on the chair
Right.
when you walk in. I
They
think
call those water bottle meetings, just in case you all
Really?
are. Yes, you do the water bottle tour of LA, where you walk in and they offer you a bottle of water. And that's called the water bottle tour.
Wow, you got
Yeah.
a bottle of water?
Yeah.
So given that, you still get up every morning and you say, I want to do this. What's the magic of this for you? The magic of getting up and working to persuade people to make movies that they don't want to make, apparently.
It's super painful. No.
Yeah.
I just don't know how to do anything else but support storytellers. I don't actually think of myself as a storyteller particularly. I think of myself as an enabler of other storytellers. And So I did that as a festival director, and now I do it as a producer. I started at South by Southwest when I was 23, so I don't actually know anything else. So I'm sort of handicapped in that way, because everyone I know is in the film business. So it's a natural thing to try to work in the milieu that I know and to support the people that I think are trying to tell good stories.
But I mean, just go back to that a minute. You're 23, and you just go down to South by Southwest. You said sort of on a lark with this movie you're making.
Well, so I was working at the Telluride Film Festival randomly because I was living there as a ski bum, and after college, and then a friend said, "Why don't you come produce my movie in Austin?" And I was 22, and I was like, okay, I don't really know what that means. I literally had no idea what that meant. And I'm from Washington, D.C., where we don't actually watch movies, so I didn't, and I went to UVA where we totally didn't watch movies. Like, I didn't see a movie the whole time I was there. So I didn't really know what that meant, so I go to Austin to make this movie, and I'm a natural organizer. It was not that hard for me, blah, blah. And I end up staying in Austin, and then someone said to someone at South by Southwest, hire Nancy Schafer to start the festival. So I didn't actually even interview. Like, I mean, it's my whole career is very lucky, because I just started it, and I'm competent. So I just could do it. I mean, I just figured it out. I figured it out by calling people on the phone and saying, tell me how to start a film festival. I'm sure Lynn did that when she started the Champlain. Tell me how to start an ideas festival in Bar Harbor, Maine. You know, that's what we do. We call on people and get their help.
So what are the projects you're excited about that are coming up?
Well, so, I mean, interesting on the subject of race, I have I have two narratives hopefully going to go. Again, we haven't raised the money, so you never know when they're going to go. Go means shoot. But one of my narratives is called Sing Sing, and it's based in the Sing Sing prison, and it's based on a program that exists there in real life that I've been to at Sing Sing called Rehabilitation Through the Arts. And what they do is the sort of upper echelon of prisoner is allowed to join this theater program and put on plays. So we have set a fiction film based in this true life program called Rehabilitation Through the Arts, and we are going to put on a play in the film. And the story is basically of a guy who's losing his family because they don't want to come visit anymore, and the kids are growing up, and it's just, you get all the reasons why that would happen. And he feels that his only path to redemption and to saving his family and to keeping his family together is to be a star in this play and show them that he's worthy of their love. So that's the story we're trying to tell. What's interesting about this project is my director is a lovely person who I made a movie called Transpecos with, which we can talk about also, but he's a lovely person who's a white guy. And we're telling a Black and Hispanic and Latino story. So that's been very interesting as we try to surround ourselves with people who know more about that community than us. So we've really embedded ourselves in the prison community. We know a lot of ex-cons. They all live, a lot of them live in the New York City area, so they're on our project as advisors and as executive producers because we want to make sure that we're speaking the language of the prison, that we're telling the stories accurately from the prison. We don't in any way think ourselves, obviously, as smarter at prison than these people, but we want to make sure, we're accurately portraying the world that we're trying to, be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you bring up another interesting subject, which Mbolo and Christina were talking about, which is, can a person cross a culture or a gender or any other, wall to tell that story on the other side? Can a Black storyteller tell a white story? Can a white story tell a Black story, and so on? You said that was a pretty big issue going on in the industry right now.
It's a big issue going on in the industry, and honestly, I have to say yes, we can, but I say it with a lot of hesitancy. Am I comfortable with the fact that there's 3 white producers and a white director on this film? No, and neither is the director, and we shouldn't be. We're not experts, and I don't think men can tell women's stories very well. Frankly, that's just me. But so there's no reason I should believe that we can tell this story. And I think that we're hedging all our bets. We're learning as much as we can. we're immersing ourselves as much as we can, but it's not our story. So we have to be as conscious of that as possible and make sure we don't trip up along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I have mixed feelings about that on many levels. Who gets to tell the story? But I mean, if you're a novelist, which I aspire to be as well, and I've got female characters in there, do I have to outsource that to somebody?
Well, that's a good point. It's a good point.
And I just, I just think that what the storyteller sees at the time is, by definition, flawed, and it has its perspective.
Right.
And you have the privilege as the viewer of looking around the corner and saying, okay, well, this is Ernest Hemingway's idea of a woman,
Right.
so take that into consideration, or something like that.
Yes.
I mean, I watch Spike Lee films, and I've liked many of them. There's others that I find deeply flawed, and one of the big things he has said is, this sort of thing. It has to, only black filmmakers can tell black stories. And I find it interesting because I prided myself as a film critic on coming up with very inconvenient things to say, just to be annoying. And I couldn't help noticing that Spike Lee is the worst storyteller of white characters I've ever seen.
And he's annoying.
Yeah.
I love his
There's
films.
that too.
Yeah.
But the white people they're white Stepin Fetchits,
Yeah.
They're terrible. But he has the right to tell that story.
Yeah.
And
And frankly, if he's not standing up and saying, we get to tell these stories, not you, who's going to? Like,
Yeah.
he has to he's on the front line of that fight. I
Yeah.
mean, and he should be.
yeah, I mean, I think it's just, if there's a story that compels you and there's a few cultural barriers, that's the one you should run straight at and take on. And then suffer the consequences, or learn from the consequences, or enjoy the consequences. So,
You just have a responsibility to your subject, regardless. I mean, to learn as much as you can. I mean, as I was saying with Transpecos, which is this movie we made 5 years ago or 4 years ago about the border. Prior to the border, I mean, the border's always been a problem, but prior to this current border problems, we made a border film. And again, this was an instance of us trying to tell a bigger story while set in a more conventional framework. So it's a thriller, it's set on the border, but what we're trying to do is tell the story of these border guards and how they live their lives. And my filmmaker, the same one that's doing Sing Sing, he lived on the border not lived full time, but like he would go down there for 3 years. He was down on the border trying to learn these guys' stories. And they would just pretend, he and the co-writer would just like pretend they were dumb tourists. And then they started becoming friends with the border guards. They started going to bars with the border guards, and they got to know their stories and know them as people. And that's what we're trying to tell the story of in Transpecos is that life is hard. I mean, it's really hard. Like, they don't want to hurt these people crossing the border, and they get paid very little to do it, and their life is super hard. And I mean, in the story, one of the characters is a border guard who says derogatory things about wetbacks all the time, and he doesn't do a lot, but in the film he says derogatory things. And it turns out he's married to a Latina woman and has 3 children. I mean, so he's basically slandering his own family. And so it's very this sort of interesting world down there of there's actually much more pain, I think, amongst that culture than we from up here think is going on.
yeah. I mean, isn't this really about the artist is granular? So you take a subject, if I say to you, panda, you've got these connotations, and then suddenly there's a new granularity to panda that you see as a result of this. So you go to border guard, and you've already got these preconceptions, and so the artist's role is to say, well, when you get down to the grassroots, here's all the many different things going on here, the nuances. Isn't that really what
Right,
the
and
artist
it's
does?
way more complex
Yeah.
than any of us think it is.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, just like in the film. I mean, this is a story of hiding and telling the truth and amplifying the truth on so many levels, the Panda Panda film.
Right.
Which is what Laura Poitras is so good at. but she's, you know, there's so many layers in this short film that we watched.
Yeah. There are so many movies that everyone here, perhaps you can bring this up at the end, fictional or documentary, they've just completely changed your perspective, and you know, feel free to mention them. But I was just making a list of a few where it might have seemed like not much of a movie at the time, but it had impact. And I'll start with a movie you've all heard of called Bambi. Apparently, when Bambi came out in the 40s, I was in my 30s at the time. It was I'm an old. When it came out, hunting went down by 50%. So Bambi is a huge act of dissent, right?
Right.
It's radical filmmaking. Practically should have a Guy Fawkes mask on its
yes,
face.
exactly.
It's kind of fascinating to me. There was a film called Blackfish, a documentary came out, and suddenly SeaWorld stopped its orca program because of its depiction of killer whales, and how they're treated in captivity.
I mean, the thing about documentary that is always a blurry line for a lot of audiences, where is it journalism and where is it storytelling? And the power of documentary is that it's both, but we have a responsibility as documentary filmmakers to tell the truth. So, that Blackfish exposed just a world no one had any idea was going on. I mean, maybe some people did, but like the rest of us didn't, and it's super, super impactful. And she got a little pushback on that film, as I recall, but it actually changed all of SeaWorld. I mean, I think it almost ruined SeaWorld.
Yeah.
She's telling us we have 5 minutes or something.
All right, well, which brings us to all of you. Tell us what's on your mind, what do you feel? We've got the people running around with mics, I believe, yes? So just raise your hand and wait till the mic gets there, because this is being filmed, so the larger audience can also hear your question. So there's one right there, lady right here. She had her hand up. Caught my eye first, anyway.
I'm the lady, I think. So I have a question about.
Can you bring the mic a bit closer?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question about film and dissent. Are we seeing? You say we live in interesting times. Are we seeing more art movies, political art movies, more short films that are about dissent or are about political activism? Are things changing in that? Or is there more of it, and does it have an impact?
What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's a tricky question, because are there more of that? I think there's always been a lot, and you just have to know where to look, because I think that artists have always been on the front lines of dissent. So these are the stories they find interesting, and part of the reason they're attracted to art as how they tell their stories. But so I don't know. I mean, I think that's a tricky question. I don't know if there's more art films about dissent, but I do think. So right now in the film industry, just so you all know, documentary is huge. Like, they're just throwing money at films about subjects. So right now it's a heyday for exposing issues and talking about talking about these important issues of the day. So maybe that means there's more of them. I think it's kind of they've always been there, but and you just have to know where to look.
Well, I think the development that speaks to this is the fact that media is so many more open channels, and people are, as audience members, they are groups are gathering and sharing information and protesting in a dissent way and influencing films that are made, and also the fact that video and cable channels have so many more channels open. I was interviewing Paul Schrader, and he said that the big change he's seen as a filmmaker since Taxi Driver, which is at this point 1 billion years ago, is that more and more filmmakers are allowed to make smaller films with not the huge responsibility of making money back. So there's a lot more voices out there, and a lot more diversity of audiences. So there's this whole explosion of
We have this
dissent.
content beast we're trying to feed all the time now.
And Netflix seems to be making series about everything. I was just on the phone with them about my shopping list yesterday, if they could make that into a series. And
And they gave you 10 million.
Yeah, I've got 10 million bucks. So if anybody want to help, I've all I got is a shopping list. I got it. Yeah. Wait for the mic over here.
There's been a great deal of discussion on the money behind and required for filmmaking, but the interesting thing about the 9-minute film or video that we saw, it could have been made with an iPhone.
I think it was. Well, no, it wasn't.
Well, it could have been made by an iPhone, and it was Weiwei and Jacob that really provided the meat for this incredible piece.
Yes.
It was 9 minutes long, and this really speaks to many roles of many filmmakers that don't need to raise a great deal of money to support a project like that. But my other question is this. Ai Weiwei can sign any work and probably be placed in any major museum today. What happened to the pandas? It's suggested that they might be in museums, and if so, especially in the United States, what position does a museum now take exhibiting such a piece, and doesn't that raise another question of the role of the museum? This really is starting to tie a number of things together that I'm not sure. What did happen? Do you know at all?
I don't know what has happened after that.
I know a little bit. So it was commissioned by the New Museum, so in
And
New York.
Rhizome, right?
And they sent them, I don't know the 20 museums, but they did send them to 20 museums around the world. And I mean, as for your very meta question, which is true, accurate, good question about it's what's the role of the museum? It's the same, I feel like, as for me, as the role of the festival director is what's our responsibility? We're the gatekeeper, so what's our responsibility to the story or to the piece of art or to the who decides? We're just people. I mean, so they have to make the decision. I mean, I think everyone wants a piece of art from Ai Weiwei. But you have to make the decision as to whether the art is worthy and of your viewers. And you have to take your responsibility very seriously that the people who are paying the money to come into your museum or spending the time with your movie or whatever, you have a fiduciary obligation to them as people, supporting you to tell the right stories.
We've got a few museum directors that were
Yeah.
speakers. Perhaps they want to chime in, but there are consequences to those decisions. And you don't just say, oh, I'm just doing this because we must voice all things, including dissent. Well, then, you're going to have government goons knocking on your door or people on the other side protesting. They're going to be throwing bricks at your doors for all you know. So there's a big impact to it as well. So it's a creative role, and it's a storytelling role in its own way to be perhaps someone can say it in a far more interesting way than me, who's a director. So we haven't heard from the left side. What's wrong with you on the left side? Come on.
I get frustrated constantly by the barrage of kind of violent, blown up films that are blockbusters. And I wondered if you would comment on Hollywood's responsibility for producing thought-provoking stories instead of, these things that kind of just rile people up. And I personally feel that they have contributed to the rising levels of violence in our society.
So I take it you're not going to go see Avengers Endgame. You don't have an Iron Man poster in your room. It is a huge question, and there's been endless studies about whether violence is perpetuated by it being in the media, and it's not clear that is a cause and effect. It's certainly not clear. The answer is not clear to me. But as an industry, my association of Hollywood studios is I suppose it's about business, but obviously responsibility cannot be shoved under the rug. It comes up like that. But when people respond to these films, and Avengers has just overtaken Avatar as the best-selling film of all time. you know, who in their right minds, who's a business person or a business entity, does not want to make money? That's otherwise, why play the game called capitalism? But at the same time, you're right, that there is this, I don't know if responsibility is a word that anybody can bestow on someone like Hollywood in the free market and all that stuff, but Hollywood has a long history of very, very important films, and they never seem to be at the same, you know, money making and responsible storytelling doesn't always meet. I mean,
all we can do is support them financially. I mean, all we can do as individuals is support the films that we think need more support. I mean, you know, so Hollywood's always going to be about entertainment and making money, and there's a lot of little films that we can all champion, and the more that we champion them, the more they'll get made. So on that note, there's a film out right now that I saw at Sundance called The Farewell, which you should all see. So it's a really charming film about an Asian American family, and it stars an Asian rapper named Aquafina.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just wonderful. And it's just a story I'd never seen before. It takes place in a world I didn't know, and it's funny, and that's the kind of film we should support. But you don't even get to hear about them that much because they don't have marketing budgets like, you know, Avatar or whatever, and you just have to find them. You just have to be conscious about finding them, seeking them out.
Good.
Just have a really quick.
The frantic waiver at the back. You finally got your mic.
I
Yes.
just have a quick comment, and I wasn't going to say anything, but I would just like to come back to the fact that there's 6% of women making films. So you wonder, you talk about profit. I have an MBA. I know about profit, but if only 6% of films are being made by women, it's not surprising that young baseball-capped men are making violent films to make money.
Of course, yes. So the industry is super hyper focused on this issue. I mean, it's not like I'm telling tales out of school. There's studies going on. There's institutes that have arisen out of getting more women into the director's chair. It's just taking way longer than we had hoped. We've been super focused on it for 10 years, and it's just not happening fast enough. And I'm not enough in the trenches of that particular argument to know all the things that they've tried to do to bolster women. There's a lot of programs, there's funds, there's this, there's that. It's just every film takes 3 years, so the cycle is just taking forever to put more women into the director's chair.
I couldn't agree with you more. There needs to be more women at the power end of this, making money
Right.
just the same way.
And also just more women, more Amy Pascals, more women running the studios, then you know, we hope that they'll greenlight more women projects.
Oh,
It's a whole lot on the
There's a
right.
lot of women over here. I'm worried that it's,
I have a related question. Yeah, I guess connecting an earlier point that was made about this concept of an artist who should be able to write about whatever they want, occupy whatever character they want. I think of Scarlett Johansson a lot because that always is evoked as the example of the actor who says, I should be able to play an Asian woman in a film. And that is by necessity of the fact that, you know, I'm an actor and my role is to occupy these other positions. In any case, it seems to me that that question is sometimes a kind of non sequitur because it is really connected to this other question about power and where it lies in Hollywood. And it's more of a question about not if somebody can do something, but if multiple people also have the opportunity to do that thing. And if there's only one type of person who can do that thing, then the problem is that there is no kind of shared perspective possible if power only lies with one particular group. In any case, that brings me to the second part, which is that it does seem like the question of who holds the camera, who gets to live behind the camera, in front of the camera, is really where that kind of diversity problem gets solved. And if it's only being worked out in the free market, then it seems like it will never be solved because necessarily that is kind of baked in to how we understand film in general, not even just how film gets made, but the very concept of Hollywood is built on a diversity problem. So I guess my question is, and I know that there is no answer in terms of one single answer in terms of solution, but is some of the answer more state funding, where it's removed from private kind of singular financing? Is it more crowdfunding as we look into the 21st century and more films are being made through mass amounts of just like gathering money from multiple people? What does it look like that does not rely on the same people to then change course, since we know that is illogical to how we think of capitalism, how it works?
Well,
So that was like a million, there was like a lot, and that was like, I gotta unpack that.
well, I just want to say that one thing that is not well known is actually how hard the Hollywood studios are trying to develop talent that is diverse. They have people who are on the, they have, it's their job. They are working to create and train diverse people of all kinds behind the camera, from script writers to editors to
They are.
and they're very active about that. And because it's not easy in terms of immediate results that you can wave a flag about, it's not making impact, but they definitely are at it.
And as for state funding, I'd say we'd need a revolution first, because we're not going to have that. That doesn't happen here.
Just like to point out that that question was from Ashley James, who will be speaking on this stage tomorrow morning at 9:30. So you got a little preview of that. You want to take one more question?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, a lot of the discussion, interesting discussion, thank you, has been about gatekeeping in terms of art coming forward, the business aspect and so on. I want to push it way back to the creative process. And art is used by dissenters on the streets all the time. I'm from Minnesota, Minneapolis, and an annual event that's extraordinarily popular is a parade of puppets and other imaginative creatures every year, all pushing at the establishment going on. This gathers hundreds and hundreds of people every year in this festival. The film we saw is sort of a bridge between those. We have the huge name of Weiwei, which enables this to go big. But in a lot of ways, art stays small. Both the creative energies that feed dissent activities, and then the skills that are developed in that may eventually get to the gatekeepers way down the road. So I wonder if you could open up your comments a bit to talk about this broader range, not just those that are going to be blockbuster films, but those that are going to feed dissent on the street, on the small level, and then amplify from there. Thank you.
Are you saying that citizens are creative about their dissent, and that's an art form of its own, or are you saying there are filmmakers who are working to get them to respond?
I'm not confining it to filmmakers. I'm saying that art, it's not on.
No, it's on.
Just keep it close.
That art is a tool of dissent.
Yeah.
And that it's used in a whole variety of ways.
Yeah.
Film is one, but it's only one. And it's the types of artists who get involved are very varied. The people who produce these puppets are highly accomplished artists who also produce puppets for operas all around the country. So that it's art at a primitive level, but also at a highly accomplished level, but that's being used for the purpose of dissent, not for the purpose of producing a money-making product. So I wondered how you think about that from where you sit, or maybe other people have comments on that as well.
Well, it's a huge thing that's been around since humans have been around, is that creative dissent. I mean, I don't want to delve too deep into the political waters, but right after there was a recent presidential election, there was a women's march in Washington, D.C., which I participated in, and the the wit and the artistry of what was written on the placards and the signs were remarkable. I would love to give you examples, but I don't want to venture into being political about it, but it showed the creativity of people who were angry about something, and that was their way of dissent, was they were using art and humor.
Yeah, I think art is impactful at every level. I mean, to your point, I think that it's, even Ai Weiwei is probably making art that's just street art and no one ever sees. I mean, you know, it's important that artists continue to work on every level. And film is just a particularly burdensome one because it is mostly pretty expensive. So that just creates a barrier to entry. But you can obviously make a film with your iPhone. It's just a question of finding an audience for that.
And because we're both in the film business is kind of why the subject of film came up a lot today. So,
We're going to wrap it there because Ted Widmer and Tim Garrity are going to come up in just a few minutes. So let's have another cup of coffee. Wes, do we have coffee? Yes, yes. All right.
thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Desson.